There are moments in the history of flight when a single launch tells you more about the future than 1,000 press releases ever could. The 12th flight of Starship was one of those moments. It ended the way the boldest experiments often do, with a handful of undeniable victories sitting right beside a handful of stubborn problems. And the people who built it understood both immediately. They knew what had worked, they knew what had broken. And in all likelihood, they already knew exactly what had to happen next. But there was someone else watching this flight far more closely than the engineers cheering from the pad. Someone with billions of dollars and an entire national ambition riding on the outcome. That someone was NASA. Because the way this enormous government partner reacts to each new Starship flight quietly shapes everything that follows: the pace, the priorities, the urgency of every upgrade still to come. So the real question after Flight 12 isn't simply whether the rocket flew, it's how NASA responded. And whether what just happened on that launch pad matters far more than even the agency first expected. In the minutes after the version 3 vehicle climbed into the sky, the man leading the company called it an epic launch and landing, and told his team they had scored a goal for humanity. Soon after, NASA's administrator added his own words, congratulating the team on a remarkable flight and framing it plainly: one step closer to the moon, one step closer to Mars. It was a careful message, measured, but underneath the politeness was something deliberate. This was not being treated as just another test. It was being treated as a real step toward returning human beings to the moon and eventually toward Mars, and the administrator didn't just send a message from a distance. He traveled all the way to the launch site to stand and watch it happen in person. That choice alone says a great deal about how seriously he takes both this rocket and the lunar mission resting on top of it. Very few people in his position have ever followed this program so closely or shown up to witness a flight with their own eyes. There's an old truth about leadership that the strongest leaders stay close to the mission, close to the problems, and locked onto the outcome. And that appears to be exactly the mindset here. It's hard not to respect it. It isn't just one man either. Almost everyone inside the agency is watching this vehicle intently because the entire plan depends on it. NASA's counting on this company to deliver the human lander that will carry astronauts down to the lunar surface. And it isn't betting on a single horse. The agency is paying billions to two competing companies to build landers capable of carrying its crews to the moon. Two giants, now effectively racing each other for the lead. One of them has already flown to the edge of space again and again, on flights stretching nearly an hour. The other's lander has yet to leave the ground, with a prototype mission toward the moon being prepared, but its timing still uncertain. That uncertainty matters because the schedule above them is unforgiving. After a successful crewed flight that looped 4 astronauts around the moon, the next plan is an orbital docking demonstration, where a crew will practice linking their capsule with a lander in space. A 2-person landing could follow as early as 2028, using whichever lander proves itself safe and ready first. If it happens, it would be the first time humans touch the lunar surface since the final Apollo mission in 1972, more than half a century of waiting. But this time, the goal reaches far beyond planting a flag and coming home. The vision now is a permanent presence near the moon's south pole, a long-term base supported by both human crews and robotic machines working side by side. A place to stay, not just a place to visit. And all of it now carries a sharper edge of urgency, because the warning has been said out loud that another nation is moving fast to surpass the United States in this new race. Speaking at a major space conference, the administrator offered a quiet but pointed caution. When humans next fly around the moon, possibly as soon as 2027, they may not be Americans, they may be taikonauts from China. It was a statement built on years of accumulating reality. China hasn't officially locked in a crewed flight around the moon for that year, but its progress is accelerating in a way that's impossible to ignore. Its space agency says the new crew spacecraft and lunar lander remain on schedule, with the ability to carry humans expected by the end of the decade. Prototype lander tests are planned. An uncrewed mission is meant to come first, and a full landing is being aimed at by 2030. Set against that steady march, the shifting timeline on the American side becomes impossible to overlook. The mission that was once meant to be the next lunar landing was quietly downgraded into an Earth orbit test flight, with the first actual landing pushed to a later mission. An entire planned lunar outpost in orbit was canceled outright, the resources redirected toward a base on the surface and more robotic exploration. That fear is already rippling through the corridors of power. Shortly after lawmakers were warned that the United States could lose the race back to the moon, they approved a larger exploration budget than had even been requested. It's proof of something that's been true for generations. The fear of finishing second remains one of the strongest engines behind American space funding. However you choose to look at it, the race is real. The stakes are enormous, and the clock is running down. Realistically, it may be the sheer speed of this rocket's development that decides whether the race is won at all. Which brings everything back to where this vehicle now stands. With Flight 12 behind it, the program has entered its most consequential stretch yet, a window where every single flight has to do two things at once. It has to push the machine toward technical maturity, and it has to do it fast enough to keep a 2028 landing within reach. And here's the thing about Flight 12. It was valuable precisely because it was imperfect. The ship proved that this new architecture can survive the violent climb to space, release its payload, endure the searing heat of reentry, and bring itself down to a controlled splashdown. Those are the foundations. None of the bolder steps could even be attempted until they were confirmed. But the booster told a harder story. It was lost during the maneuver that flips it around for the return journey, apparently triggered by a single engine failure that cascaded outward and took 16 neighboring engines with it. That kind of failure exposes a real weakness in how the engines are shielded from one another, a gap that simply cannot be carried forward without being fixed. So those unresolved problems set the agenda for what comes next. The following flight will almost certainly be shaped more by what Flight 12 failed to do than by what it managed to achieve. If the investigation points to clean, systematic fix, better shielding, smarter ignition timing, a revised return burn profile, and if that fix can be built and proven quickly, then the next flight could attempt a controlled booster landing on the water. If the investigation uncovers something deeper, the plan will be eased back again. What's telling is that the first attempt to catch a returning ship out of the sky has been placed somewhere across the next few flights. That signals something important. The team isn't treating booster recovery as a gate that must be cleared before ship recovery can advance. The two milestones are being chased on parallel tracks, each moving as fast as its own engineering allows. And once full reusability is finally demonstrated, the whole center of gravity shifts to the part of the plan that is genuinely staggering in its ambition: refueling a spacecraft in orbit. The system designed for this is a chain of 3 vehicles, and every link has to work flawlessly in sequence. First, a dedicated fuel depot launches and parks itself in low orbit. It's a stretch version of the upper stage, its tanks enlarged but stripped of the heat tiles, the reentry flaps, and the extra hardware a returning ship needs. All that saved weight poured instead into insulation and storage. It sits up there and waits, an orbital filling station with nowhere to be. Then across a series of later launches, tanker versions of the same ship rise to meet it. Each one is configured to haul as much propellant as possible instead of crew or cargo. They navigate to the depot on their own, dock nose to nose using laser-guided relative navigation and quick-connect fluid lines, and pump superchilled methane and oxygen across the gap, all in the weightlessness of orbit. The challenge isn't just solving that delicate transfer once. It's solving it again and again, reliably at scale, under the pressure of a real schedule. No one is entirely certain how many of those tanker trips it will take. The lander needs somewhere in the range of 12 to 1,500 tons of propellant when fully loaded, and the number of flights depends almost completely on how much each tanker can deliver per visit. In the most optimistic case, each tanker hauling 200 tons, and the lander needing only a partial fill because it operates in the moon's gentle gravity, as few as 4 trips might do it. Under more cautious assumptions, the figure climbs to somewhere between 8 and 16. That range alone shows how much remains untested. The agency's own planning number sits right in the middle, around 10 flights, and that's the figure everything else is being measured against. Meanwhile, the broader lunar program has stepped into its most demanding phase yet. For the first time, hardware from both competing lander companies will be folded into a single crewed mission. It echoes an old Apollo-era rehearsal, when a lander was first tested in Earth orbit before anyone dared risk a real descent. Whether astronauts will actually climb inside either lander this time is still an open question. It depends on whether both companies can finish working life support and independent flight controls in time. Before any human is allowed to ride one down, the agency still demands a full uncrewed rehearsal. A lander must fly the entire sequence by itself, refuel in orbit, slip into lunar approach, descend toward the South Pole guided by advanced terrain mapping, deploy its astronaut elevator and climb back to orbit again, every step performed without a single human hand on the controls. That dress rehearsal may end up being the most unforgiving test in the whole campaign. Which is exactly why this program now lives or dies on precision and coordination. If the goal of putting people back on the moon by 2028 is going to survive contact with reality, there is no margin for sloppiness left. For now, every eye turns toward the next flight, and the expectation hanging over it is simple: this time it had better not disappoint.
NASA's official planning figure of approximately 10 tanker flights represents the middle of that distribution, and it is the number against which the agency's launch cadence requirements are calibrated. NASA's Artemis program has now entered a far more demanding phase. It will mark the first time NASA integrates hardware from both competing human landing system providers into a single crewed mission. The mission is similar in spirit to Apollo 9 in 1969, when NASA tested the lunar module in Earth orbit before risking a real lunar landing. However, whether astronauts will actually enter either lunar lander remains uncertain. That depends on whether SpaceX and Blue Origin can complete functional life support systems and independent flight controls in time. Before astronauts can land on the Moon, NASA still requires an uncrewed Starship HLS mission to perform the entire lunar landing sequence autonomously. That includes orbital refueling, lunar insertion landing near the Moon's south pole, using advanced terrain navigation, deploying the elevator system, and returning safely to lunar orbit, all without human intervention. Currently planned for mid-2027, this may become the single most unforgiving test of the entire Artemis campaign. That is exactly why SpaceX's Starship program now requires an extraordinary level of precision and coordination if the company hopes to achieve its goal of returning humans to the Moon as early as 2028. For now, all eyes turn toward Starship Flight 13, and expectations are high that it will not disappoint.